Because Izhbitzer was really Ohev Israel. He really wanted people to get along. He was looking for,
Right.
in the tradition of the Baal Shem Tov, really wanted to bring people more together than,
Yeah.
not everybody's the same, but there are ways to give each other space. And Parashat VaEt'hanan, the Izhbitzer, good stuff. Let's jump right in.
All right. Good morning, everybody, everywhere. We are in the second Torah portion of the final and fifth book of the Chumash, the Chumash Devarim. This is the parsha of Teshuvah. Moshe Rabbeinu is warning the people that they're going to fall in terms of their observance, particularly in the area of idol worship, etc. And as a result, the future, he's warning them about their future in the land of Israel, and he's enjoining them to do teshuvah. And the Ishbitzer, of course, is going to take this in really awesome directions. And without further ado, let's get to the psukim about this
Yep.
and get right into the
All
text.
right. So, quick announcements as usual before we jump into the text. And in order to access the source sheet, you go to our Hebrew Learning Circle's website, and on the top right there's Jewish resources. You go down the drop-down menu and click on Parsha Videos. Basically, that's where it is. So, if you would like to read, you don't have to. We're going to read in Hebrew and translate it into English, so it should all be clear. But if you do want to have text in front of you, there it is. Hebrew translation and the commentary by the Izhbitzer. Hebrew translation. Also, in the very bottom, there's a little bio of Rabbi Mordechai Yosef Liener, who's known as the Izhbitzer Rebbe. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe, share, and like, and we will jump right in to the text. So first of all, I want to say that refer people to those verses are in chapter 6. It's at the beginning of the parsha. It's Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 17, 18, and 19. And they read like this: Shamor tishmehun et mitzvot Adonai Elohechem ve'edotav v'chutav asher sivach. Be sure to keep the commandments, decrees, and laws that your God Adonai. In up till now, it's all in the plural, and then it says has enjoined upon you. That is in singular. That's important. Well, that's where we're going to be dealing with later. And then the next verse is Vasita Hayashar V'Atov B'Einei Adonai Lemani Tav Lach Uvata V'Yarashta Et Haaretz HaTova Asher Mishba Adonai La'avotecha. Do what is right and good in the sight of Adonai, that it may go well with you and that you may be able to possess the good land that your God Adonai promised on oath to your fathers, forefathers. So we see here that Moshe is telling us to keep the mitzvot, and telling us why we really need to earn our right to the land in that way. The third verse, 19, the Izhbitzer will mention at the very end, Lahadof et kol oivecha mipanecha asher diber Adonai, and that all your enemies may be driven out before you. And I think what's important in terms of the commentary later is pushed out or held at bay as Adonai has spoken. And we'll see later how that's significant. The Izhbitzer says the following. Ha'inyan, I'm going to start from his commentary. He obviously brings the first verse, 17. העניין שנאמר, דחילה לשון רבים, So the issue that he wants to tackle and interpret for us is that in the beginning of this sentence, it is written in plural. Shamor tishmerun. He gives us the example. You will observe the mitzvot in plural. That means all of you, right, all the people of Israel. It's addressed to the cloud, to the entirety of the people. ואחר כך לשון יחיד אשר ציווך. At the end of the sentence, it says, and those laws and ordinances and statutes that I have commanded you, singular. בעניין בזה, the issue here, כי התרי"ג מצוות נתן אדוני לישראל, that all the 13 mitzvot, commandments, God gave to Israel, to all of Israel. והם שווים לכל נפש, and they are equally applied to all people, all souls. לקיימם מבלי שום שינוי, לנפש אחת מחברו. To observe them without any differentiation between one person and another. It applies to everybody equally. אך עדותיו, היינו טעמי המצוות, and here I think it begs for some explanation that עדותיו is one of three kinds. You want to give us a rundown on that? How is עדותיו different from chukav, etc.?
So, as the Izhbitzer begins, we have a generalized sense of mitzvot. 613 different ways in which a Jew can connect to God in a general way. But if we look more closely, we will find that if you look at the 613 mitzvahs, they can be, in general, divided into three types of mitzvahs. Two of them are mentioned in our pasuk, importantly, and one of them specifically is going to deal with, as opposed to the general idea of the mitzvah. We have mishpatim, which are not mentioned here. Mishpatim are basically the rules of society, which even if the Torah had not informed us about them, in general, a normal society would come up with these ideas on their own. Don't steal, don't take someone else's property, don't hurt somebody. Then we have the chukim, which are the opposite of that, the very opposite. They're rules which on the surface seem to they seem to be irrational. I can eat a cow, but I can't eat a pig. The kosher laws are a primary example of this. Now people can come up later with reasons, this is healthy, this is not so healthy, blah, blah, blah. Of course, that's not true. It's simply God's will. We do it because these are chukim. Then we have the edut. Now it's interesting. He's using edut here in a little bit of a different way, which will be drawn out by him, but not really. Let me just give you the definition of an edut comes from the word witness, a witness.
That's right.
In general, edus are the mitzvahs which relate to, and this is important, historical events. But what he's going to get at is it relates to historical communal memory.
Mm-hmm.
Communal memory. Prime example: eating matzah on Passover. We're remembering an event which took place. As I said, the Izhbitzer is going to sort of redefine edus slightly, but ultimately it's going to relate to its true definition as well.
Right? Hainu tamei mitzvot. He calls it the purpose, the rationale, or the kavana, that you could say also the intention of the mitzvah. Right? כל אחד ואחד מרגיש טעם במצווה, טעם מיוחד. And so what it says here, that here each person feels a different kind of purpose in any given mitzvah. So the purpose, and not the general purpose, but the personal, the subjective purpose, or the subjective reason or perspective, I guess, a person has on a mitzvah would be individual, depending on the person. So kol echad v'echad margish tam b'hamitzvah. Each the person feels a purpose for mitzvah, tam miuchad, a unique purpose. She'ein chavero margish, that another person does not feel about that same mitzvah. V'lo kfi havanat chavero, and so one person will not necessarily feel the purpose that another person is attributing to a mitzvah or understanding about a mitzvah.
Right. Now here what he's doing is he's setting up edus to include certain mishpatim as well. In other words, he's setting up a contrast between certain types of mitzvahs and other types of mitzvahs. But really what he's getting at here is something that modern psychology refers to based on a famous Japanese film called the Rashomon effect. That's what he's talking about right here.
Right.
In other words, if I'm keeping kosher and you're keeping kosher, we're keeping kosher.
Right.
That's all there is to it. But when I sit down to my Seder night on Passover, there are some people. What does it mean to me?
Right.
And it could. You could go from, if you could be a fly in the wall or be Eliyahu Navi and go to all the Siddharim around the world,
right.
You would, for me, it means God opened the door that leads to Har Sinai.
Right.
For other people, it means something related to some social justice stuff that's going on in 2022 in New York City.
Right.
So here's where we get into by what lens, based on who I am, my personality,
right.
Through what lens am I viewing
right.
the communal history of the Jewish people?
But what I'm getting is that he's actually completely diverging from the classical take of Mishpatim and Edut and Chukim, and he's saying that there's a level of Edut to all mitzvot, and that's a subjective meaning I assign to it. So that's a whole, I think it was worth explaining the three categories of mitzvot, but he's talking, using the same language to talk about that. I always bring some subjective meaning or some subjective way of handling the mitzvot that are equally applied to everybody.
There's a famous Japanese movie where the story is told from four different. There was a murder and an assault committed, and then the entire film of four individuals are relating. And the film plays over four times according to the perspective of the four witnesses or victim, etc. of the event.
Each witness had a different story.
And each one told a different story, obviously. And this became, and psychologists looked at this and said, "Hey, wait a minute. This guy was getting at something." And there's something actually called that's why, when people are trying to go through past traumas and work things out, be it siblings or parents or who knows what, and that's not what happened. That's what's been bugging you for 30 years. That's not even what happened. And that's because of this subjectivity.
That's
and rationalizing, and there's a lot going on as to why human beings do that. But to now put it into macrocosm, there are these mitzvahs floating around, and and what the Izhbitzer is saying that, wait a minute now, I'm seeing it differently than you, and you're seeing it differently than him. And we have to figure that out.
Each person has a subjective take on it, and now he's going to bring an example. So let's go on with this example. As we saw in the Talmud, specifically in Psachim, the tractate of Psachim, page Nun Gimel, which is 53, the second side of the page. בין שאמרו להדליק ובין שאמרו שלא להדליק, שניהם לדבר אחד נתכוונו. That's a quote from the Gemara. And what happens there is that there's a discussion of on Yom Kippur. There's the mitzvah is to avoid conjugal relations with one's spouse, and some people said in order to fulfill this mitzvah, you need to light a candle from Yom Kippur, because when there's light, they won't be tempted. Because it's not it's not dark. It's not conducive. And other people say, no, you should not light candle before Yom Kippur, because when they don't see each other, then they're not tempted. And the Gemara says, they had completely opposite opinions about how this should be handled, but they meant the intentionality was for the same purpose, to make sure that they fulfill the mitzvah of avoiding conjugal relationships on Yom Kippur. Ki betchila, so we'll see now what he makes of it. Ki betchila haya nira she'echad cholek al chavero. Says Izhbitzer, in the beginning, you would think that these two people were in disagreement with one another. Ach bemet lo nechleku, but really, they were not disagreeing with one another, because they both intended for the same purpose. So one person should not be, I would translate this, judgmental about the other person's different opinion. Midotav, meaning one person should not put the other person down because they have a different take on this. Because the person should understand that for the other person, that is the only way that they can fulfill that mitzvah for Yom Kippur. That works for them, but it doesn't necessarily work for you. And it's okay for two different people to have two different ways of handling the challenge here, basically, that the mitzvah is presenting. He's defining edut as a different layer of the process of fulfilling a mitzvah.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So this is the interpretive. This is the subjective sort of interpretive space where people can, with a common purpose, find different way to fulfill that purpose.
Exactly.
Right, and obviously here the purpose is that we want to keep the mitzvah of the fast, and particularly in this Gemara, it's a fast from conjugal relationships. So now he's quoting from the third verse that we quoted, and it's interesting because you would think on its face there was no connection. There is a connection that, if you will fulfill all the mitzvot, then you will be able to win your enemies. You would be able to, you'll be victorious in battles, right? You'll own the land and you'll be able to be triumphant when you're challenged by other people who are trying to wage war. So that's the simple interpretation. But what does Izhbitzer do with it? He says, this is the meaning of the word, the specific word, lahadof et oivecha mipanecha. That's why I said the translation here means the translation here was to drive out your enemies. But to drive out here, that's not exactly a good translation. This is to push back your enemies, right? To hold them at bay. Lahadof in Hebrew means to cast out, to expel. So he says it's important here that that this verse is using the word lahadof. It could have used the word to le'ashmid or le'abed, which is to kill or to annihilate your enemies, but it doesn't say that. And then he explains why is that meaningful. This hints is referring to uh, to people from Israel that have disagreement. And you know what happens when Jews have disagreement? It gets heated right? Often. So the word to push away means you push away a person that you have a disagreement with, but you don't annihilate them. You don't chop them down. You don't cut them down, God forbid, he says.
Rak, Rab Yichai Benecha. I think tune them out, I think would be a good translation.
Was
Tune
that
tune it out. I think tune them out.
interesting? Okay, that's an interesting
I'll tell
thing.
you something. This reminds me.
Yeah,
The Balatanya says an interesting thing. He says if a person is troubled by negative thoughts, he says don't try to kill these negative thoughts because you can end up choking yourself.
right.
He says, but he says here's the difference. If you find yourself with a negative thought, acknowledge it.
Yeah,
Right? It sounds like a Zen thing, you know.
yeah,
Say hello, and then watch it fly. He
yeah,
says, but where you get into trouble is if you let it stay there. He says, quote, push the thought away with both hands.
that's right.
Push it away, let
Oh,
it go.
right.
Don't dwell. Don't
Yeah,
dwell on it.
yeah,
So here he's saying a Bali Machlekes, troublemakers, arguers, people like to fight about this.
yeah,
How are people in shul? Oh no, the Haftarah ends here. No, it doesn't. It ends here.
yeah,
You
that's
know,
right.
and a person can get drawn into machlekes so
That's right.
easily,
Yeah,
like a vacuum cleaner gets
yeah, yeah,
sucked in. It's so easy,
yeah,
uh, as we all know, to get drawn
yeah,
into an argument, a fight. And
that's
and
right.
the Izhbitzer is saying, hold on, when this happens, when this starts to come up, take it easy. Remember, this guy is seeing things through his eyes.
And for what he needs.
This is
Yeah,
his way of dealing with the
yeah,
world.
that's right.
He's telling you, he's judging you on that.
Yeah,
Okay, that's his problem. I don't have to give him the same
that's right.
negative energy back. I
That's
can
right.
push this guy to the side. I can push this argument to the side and not get drawn in.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, well, that's exactly what he's saying. Push them away. It's a synonym to lahadof. It's a synonym for the word in the verse lahadof etoivecha. So that they do not distract you from
Right.
your avoda, which is your divine service. It's your spiritual work, right? So he's finding an interesting middle lane here.
Yeah,
Don't cut
he's
them
basically
down, but don't invite them in.
exactly. He's saying a very Zen thing here. Um, he's saying don't become attached.
Yeah,
Don't become People get so sucked into the fight. He's saying push it to the side because you're going to get distracted from what you need to do
yeah,
in this
yeah,
world.
yeah. Exactly right. Yeah, exactly right. I'll give you an example from a friend of mine from a long time ago. His name was Greg, and he was a very observant guy. In fact, at that time, we happened to be in the same community, but he was amongst all of us. He was the most observant. He was the most really meticulously, paying attention to things. More than most of us schleppers. We're kind of trying our best, but and one time we went. He and I traveled. This is before we were married. Before it was because the good old days where we were all like bachelors and going places and like that. So we go to a visit to in Philadelphia. I remember we traveled to stay for Shabbat at somebody's home in New Jersey, and we made a connection, but we didn't really know them well. And they knew about him that he's hyper observant compared to the rest of us. And they said to him, they said, Greg, listen, tell us your observance level and your kashrut level, especially your kashrut level, because we want to make sure that we can accommodate you, when you come to stay for Shabbat. You know what he said to them? This really floored me. He said, I don't want to know your kashrut level. I just want to know whether you take kashrut seriously. If you take kashrut seriously, whatever you're doing is good. And that ended the conversation. He says, yes, we take kashrut seriously. And that's where it ended. And I was quite floored. I was really, yeah. And that's the Izhbitzer. Maybe he read the Izhbitzer, That works for them. This may work for me, but we have the same purpose.
Wow, that's a beautiful nimshot. That's a beautiful word.
Yeah.
I'm impressed with that guy.
I'll tell you, I was impressed. It's like I like
because I've been in similar scenarios where it hasn't turned out that well.
Understood, and I think that's why the Izhbitzer is, because Izhbitzer was really of Israel. He really wanted people to get along. As I read his commentary, he was looking for in the tradition of the Baal Shem Tov of really wanted to bring people more together than not everybody's the same, but there are ways to give each other space, and
Exactly.
I think that's kind of like sums it up here.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I get out of this is that we shouldn't feel. I'm speaking for me now. What I'm getting out of this is that if I see someone acting differently, I shouldn't take it as a personal challenge
Right.
to my ways.
Right.
Right. And even though I'm viewing things, and to be just conscious of the fact that I'm seeing everything through my
Yeah.
eyes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's if I can just hold on to that, I
That's
think
right.
it will keep people out of a lot of trouble and
Yeah.
service.
Yeah. And I like what you're saying. I'm going to second that. I'm going to latch on to what you just said. So, me too. And I think on the other side of that, he says, and you can hold people, you can have boundaries too, right? You can hold people at bay if you need to. It's
Right.
like you can understand them, you can love them, then you can say, your stuff is distracting to me, So, for my own peace of mind, I need to have distance here. And I mean, well, I
Yep,
think
that's
it's
good.
a good place to leave it.
A lot to think about.
Yeah, a lot to think about. So, yeah, I think with that, we shall be blessed with, the ability to find that middle ground, that this balance that this was just talking about. And I think with that, we're going to end here. Thank you, Rebelli. Thank you for everybody else for learning with us. Again, if you haven't yet, please subscribe, share, like, all that good stuff. I haven't said it yet. There it is. And we appreciate you. And God willing, next Wednesday again with Hasidic Torah and commentary. Shalom for now.
Ahava